welcome everyone. Again, this is Vas Vassiliadis from the University of Chicago Globus team. I'm going to talk to you today about why you should be subscribing to the Globus service. Before we get started, just want to mention that if you do have questions, please enter them into the chat window on the Blue Jeans app, and Greg or Mary or myself will get to them either during the presentation or at the end. And also, please keep your microphones muted. We are recording this session. And so without any further ado, I'm going to jump in here. Before I talk about the subscription features themselves, I want to step back for a minute and talk about our mission and why we even have a subscription model, right? So as the slide says in many words, our mission is to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of research engaged in data-driven science and scholarship. But the important part is that last phrase, right? Through sustainable software. Because if we build something that's not sustainable, people begin to rely on it, and then it goes away, and that's substantial upheaval to their world. So, why do we care about sustainability, right? There are really two aspects to sustainability for us. The one is so that we can meet people's expectations today, right? So we've got a lot of users. I'll show you some numbers in a second here. But our objective from day one has been to deliver production-grade software, right? So that just like any other piece of enterprise IT on your campuses, in your institutions, in your companies, you can rely on this and have some assurances it will be available, that it will scale and be able to meet your needs. And that's sort of the current view of your expectations, perhaps. But a lot of people have what I think of as aspirational needs, right? So, what are the things that people would like to do and aspire to do in their research and in their daily work, and how can we best support that? And this is important because it's not only sufficient for us to be sustainable and cover the cost of current operations, but it's equally important to be able to continue to invest in the product and be able to meet these aspirational needs of our users. So how are we doing so far, right? So we've got, as you can see from some of these numbers, and they're a few days out of date here, but they'll give you a sense for how broad adoption has been by the community. Some of the interesting ones for me are that we've got over 100 subscribers, right? So we do have a fair number of people that are actually paying to use the service. But this next slide, I think, tells a very different story, right? So this is the number of active endpoints, in other words, endpoints that have had at least an active transfer in any given month. And you can see the disparity between the number of endpoints that are used by non-paying users versus those in the bottom here in green that belong to paying subscribers. Right, and so as this free curve, so this free line grows, we're not seeing the sort of commensurate or proportional growth in the green line, and that's really what I'm trying to get across here: the importance of growing that so that everybody can continue to have access to this service. So we've gotten this far through a lot of support from many of the funding agencies. So I'd like to thank them firstly. But very importantly, again, I'd like to thank our subscribers, some of which are listed here. So why should you subscribe? So I'm going to run through a number of the features that you get and some of the additional benefits that come with a subscription. And then hopefully that'll give you a bit of flavor, or maybe it'll expose you to some things that you didn't know were even available. And we can go from there. So first off, the Globus subscription is really, I view it as a way to improve collaboration through the ability to share data very, very easily, both within your institution and beyond organizational boundaries with your collaborators and people that you're working with at any other institution. And the idea here is to really make this as simple as pointing and clicking and off you go. Someone else can get access to the data with full permission control. So let me show you how easy that is in the Globus service. So here I am looking at my campus cluster on the University of Chicago campus. It's called Midway. So this is my home folder, you can see here. right? And let's say I'm working with someone at our friends down the road here at Northwestern, right? And I want to share with them all the files in this STFC folder, right? All I need to do with Globus is click share, and this creates what I would think of as sort of an overlay on top of the normal permissions in the file system, right? So this does not in any way change what you as a system administrator have done on your system, but instead it allows those that don't have a local account or local account access on that system to get to data through the Globus service. So I have this overlay created, and now I'm going to add permissions to the user or users or groups. So you can see here I can share with a group, or I can share with all users, anyone that's authenticated and logged into Globus. But in this case, I'm just going to share with a specific individual. If I know their username, I can type that here and search for it, or I can just put in an email, and I can send an email notification to them. In this case, I'm using a demonstration user that I have set up for this purpose. And when I click add permission, this user will get an email, and they will be able to go and log into Globus and view that data, even though they don't have access to that system, right? So here I am logged in as this demo doc user. So if I go to the file manager and look for NW share, right, there it is. And there's the data that they're looking at, right? You can see they can't navigate up and out of that, right? So with just a couple of clicks, I've given them access to the data in this folder. And just to show you, it's the same one here, right? So that's the Go data that they were looking at. So that's really how simple sharing is. And there are many, many more applications to sharing than just that sort of ad hoc point and click mode. So I want to talk about a few of those, some of the common use cases that our subscribers are deploying sharing against. So I just showed you the ad hoc sharing, right? So I can go all the way from making data available to a single user all the way to sort of more publicly across all Globus users. More interesting, perhaps, is this use case, which is sharing data from an instrument, right? So some kind of a light source, a high-resolution imaging device, or a next-gen sequencer, what have you. So the idea here is being able to pull data off that instrument and do it in a reliable way, and do it in a way that sort of restricts and controls access to data for the various users that are using that expensive and shared instrument, right? So in the case of a next-gen sequencer, you may have dozens of investigators submitting samples for sequencing, and you want to pull the data off there. You want to keep those data separate for each of the investigators or each of the labs or each of the customers. And so you can create these shared folders, the shared endpoints, as we call them, or collections, and give users access to that. And then, very importantly, the users themselves can further manage access on those endpoints. So from all intents and purposes, it looks just like another storage system, another disk drive, however you want to view it, that the user has full control over, even though they don't have local account or direct account access on that system. Also, growing usage is this mode of using Globus to distribute data from a large sort of a community collection or some kind of archive. And this is typically front-ended by some kind of portal or science gateway that the community or that the institution has built, right? And there are actually two modes here that you can use to pull data from these systems. One is the sort of the traditional Globus asynchronous transfer mode that presumably many of you on the call are already using. But then there is also a more synchronous HTTPS-based transfer, which I'll show you in just a second, right? And then, going a step beyond that, most of the applications in the HPC space obviously have some kind of compute or some kind of job that runs somewhere in the flow. So being able to stage data into directories for processing, and then being able to stage data back out for users to access results can all be done using these kinds of shared endpoints that I just showed you. So the next thing I want to talk about is how Globus can really provide a unified view across all types of storage systems So whether we're looking at a local disk drive, your campus cluster, some public cloud, or even on-premises object store, from Globus's perspective, from the end user's perspective, if they're using Globus, those can all look the same. So right now, in addition to sort of the normal POSIX style file systems, we support, as you can see here on the left, a number of other storage providers like Spectra's Black Pearl, Western Digital ActiveScale, and so on. And on the right here, I'm showing some of the connectors that are planned. Some of these are on development right now, such as the box connector, and some of these others are coming down the pike in due course. So let me jump back over here to my browser and show you how this looks when I'm actually accessing some of these systems through Globus. So here is my my S3 buckets, right? So I'm looking at S3 through the Amazon AWS console, right? And here's what they look like. Whoops. Here's what they look like in my Globus file manager, right? So just the same, and I can take the same kinds of actions as I can on any other file system, right? Just point and click and transfer and share and so on. Here's another example, right? Here's my Google Drive, right? There are all my folders in Google Drive. Same thing in Globus, right? I can go to my Google Drive endpoint, and I'm looking at the same folders, and I can do the exact same thing here, right? So very straightforward. There's a little bit of setup obviously involved in getting these connectors in place, but once that's there, from the perspective of the end user, it just looks like any other piece of storage that they have access to. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is how you can actually just use a browser to preview and look at data with full fine-grained access control, right? This is something that is sort of integral to the Globus value proposition, right? The ability that you can have very fine-grained access control. But you can now do this without requiring that the user install any software, right? So if you want to have an asynchronous transfer, the user would have to install Globus Connect Personal. But in the absence of that, you can actually just use direct browser download as you would with any other browser web app. So here is an endpoint that has this feature enabled, right? So I have some climate data here, some temperature graphs that have been generated. Let's say this might have been done by some kind of compute run on my campus cluster. So I can select one of these, and you'll see here on the right, I get a couple of different options that are enabled, right? So one is download, so I can click and download this file. The other is open, which will just, if it's a file that the file type that the browser can recognize, right, it will just open it up in the browser as you would expect, right? Or I can get a link and share this out to other users, right? So that's a pretty nifty way, I think, of really making your research storage accessible via HTTPS, again, with the full access control that Globus provides. Something that we released fairly recently, it was about 6 months ago now, is the ability to manage protected data through the Globus service, right? So whether you have data that's subject to HIPAA regulations, PHI, or controlled unclassified information, from the perspective of your users, just for moving that and sharing it and so on, is pretty much the same as what I call regular data, right? This is the things that you're probably doing already. So some of the features that come into play here, one is probably the most important one, arguably, is this notion of additional authentication assurance. So what this means is I can require that in order to access a certain collection, the user must present a credential from a certain institution or a certain identity provider, right? So here is a collection that requires, in this case, an Argonne National Lab credential. This one requires a UChicago credential, right? And if I try and access either of these collections with the wrong credentials, I'll be prompted to authenticate, even though in Globus you can link multiple identities from multiple institutions. That's another convenience. But when it comes to managing what we call these high assurance endpoints or high assurance collections, you do have to present the specific credential that the administrator has specified. We also implement, we also implement timeouts that will require you to re-authenticate with that specific credential within a certain period of time. So let me actually show you how that works here. So go back to my file browser, and I'm going to go access a high assurance collection that requires my my University of Chicago credential. Right, this is again another internal system, but because it's storing protected data, it says, okay, I must log in with Bash at U Chicago, even though I was logged in with that identity because I just showed you my campus cluster. It requires me to log in again because there was a timeout, right? So the timeout was set that I have to re-authenticate within a certain period of time. So I will go here and log in with my University of Chicago credentials. And we do have two-factor authentication here. So for those that are not aware, if your identity provider has two-factor authentication enabled, Globus just supports that. It's pretty seamless because we redirect out to you. So there's nothing additional you have to do there. But here I am now. I've re-authenticated. I've shown that I have a current and valid U Chicago token, and therefore I can go and access the data in that endpoint. Some additional things that we do for protected data is to isolate each instance of an application or a session, if you will, that is actually running and accessing the service or accessing data on that protected endpoint, right? So one example is if I'm running, just you saw me accessing that collection in my browser here. If I went and tried to access that same collection through another application, I would be required to re-authenticate, right? And likewise, if I were to try and do something against that through our command line interface, that's considered as yet another application instance. And then another example is, even though this is not an application, it is considered another instance, right? So if I'm using the same web app on my mobile phone, let's say, I would have to re-authenticate there. So those are really more features from a user perspective. There's a whole bunch of things that you get through a Globus subscription that are more relevant to system administrators. So one of those is the management console that allows you to sort of look at your current activity and monitor that and take action based on things that may need your attention. So I'm going to show you what the management console looks like here. Right, so this is a real-time view into all the endpoints and activity going on in all the endpoints that I have access to as an administrator. I can click down on any of these. I can sort of mouse over and the display will change. And I'll get some summary information on who's doing what. Usually the ones of interest are the ones in orange or the ones in red that indicate that something is wrong. The orange indicates that Globus is retrying for whatever reason. It's encountered an error and it's trying to work through that automatically. And that's useful for you to, as a sysadmin, to go and click on that and see what's going on, and perhaps there's some action that you can take. So you can look at the event log, and you can also take action if you have the appropriate permissions to pause or cancel the transfer. You can also set pause rules, which are a very sort of easy way to suspend activity on your endpoint. So I can say pause activity on the following endpoint so that I can perform some kind of test. Perhaps there's some unscheduled maintenance that has to be performed on the endpoint or whatever. So very easy way to see what's going on in real time. And then the other thing that you can actually get access to is a set of parameters that will help you fine-tune performance. Right? We call these network use parameters. So there's two of them: concurrency and parallelism. So concurrency, think of it as how many files can the service sort of move between two endpoints concurrently, and within each of those concurrent sessions, parallelism dictates how many chunks I can break that file up into, how many threads I can have within each of those. So sort of these two levels that are overlaid that give Globus the performance boost. And for those that care, this is the formula that we use to determine what the optimal number is. Because, again, remember that there's a source and a destination endpoint. So you have control over your endpoint, but perhaps the other side is managed by a different institution, in which case, we try and find the best middle ground for that. So I'll show you quickly where you can get access to those. So if you go to the endpoints page and find your endpoint, on the server tab for that endpoint, you'll see the section called network use. And we will set by default, or Globus will set by default, this normal profile when the endpoint is created. But you can go in and edit that, and there are different ones. So for instance, I can say, I want to be more aggressive. I've got a bigger endpoint, or I've just upgraded my server, so I can increase some of those numbers. Or you can set, completely custom numbers, within certain bounds. Again, setting these to extremely high values in many cases will not make a big difference because the other side of the connection may not be capable of supporting that level of throughput. But that's proven useful in many cases to really take advantage of some of the bandwidth that people have. So here's an example of some tests that were run by the ESNet team between various labs. So here's the NCSA, NERSC out on the West Coast, Argonne, and then Oak Ridge. So you can see some pretty impressive numbers that were achieved. And if you're interested in learning more about this, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to give you more of the background behind some of these kinds of tests and how you can get that extra little bit of throughput from your own connections. So I showed you the sort of the real-time view into what's going on your endpoints. We also do have historical reports that we provide that will give you some level of sort of accountability, or allows, in some cases, people use these to bill out services or to charge back for services and so on. So the first historical report you get is a monthly snapshot that shows you sort of a rolling window, how much data, how many users you've had each month using your endpoints. For each endpoint, it will show you here what the what those look like on a long-term chart, and you can drill down into the data behind those charts, both along user dimension or along the endpoint dimension. So that's a monthly snapshot, and then there is also a complete historical sort of CSV dump of everything, right? So this is every single transfer that's taken place against your endpoints, and you can pull this into whatever tool you like and do some analyses of your own. So those are sort of more system features, but then there's the other side of the equation, which is our dedicated support team. So we do have a team that's based here in Chicago that provides support as part of a paid subscription. A lot of that support typically comes in when you're first installing and configuring your endpoints, but also ongoing with operational issues. Sometimes things will change on your end as far as your storage systems, or users will do different things perhaps they shouldn't be doing. So in all cases, we're sort of first line of support, and we do have a triage model where we then look at all tickets and then escalate them to the appropriate people within the organization. So many of these, you can see here, more than a third of our tickets get resolved just the first touch, the first time that one of our support engineers looks at it. Those that get escalated, on average, we resolve those within a day. But we do have, I believe, a very strong support team, and it gets a lot of unsolicited praise. I do like to put a shout out to those folks. They work very hard, and I think they keep our subscribers very happy for the most part. The other thing I'd like to touch on before I start wrapping up here is the fact that Globus has a lot of expertise in integrating these capabilities into other applications. So I mentioned some examples briefly about using Globus for data distribution, but there's also many use cases where you want to automate data flows so you can do things at scale, where you perhaps are building your own applications and want to use our identity and access management systems, Globus Auth, for that. So we have a bunch of these sort of platform services, as we call them. They're really just exposed as APIs that you can talk through our SDK or directly through the language of your choice, right? So the core one is Globus Auth. That underpins everything and provides all the authentication, authorization, access control, and so on, linked identities. And then the transfer and sharing APIs are also available to you. And you can do pretty much anything that you saw me doing on that web app directly through the APIs on your own applications. Here's one of our earliest users of the Globus platform. The Entire Research Data Archive has the option to use Globus to transfer some fairly big data sets. I think they now host upwards of 30, maybe more petabytes of data. And some of these are sort of terabyte size, many terabytes in size. And what happens is when you click on here, you will the system will create a shared endpoint. It will grant you permissions on that, just like I showed you early on, except it's all done automatically. And then you'll get the link and you'll drop into that shared endpoint and pull down the data. As an example of the automation, so this is some of the solutions that we've built in conjunction with our professional services team and our users. This is an instance of a flow where a user is using the advanced photon source at Argonne. They get that data. It's moved to a server where it's pre-processed and then it's put out, and they do some initial rendering on that on one of the ALCF supercomputers. The user sort of steps in, looks at that, and sees if the image is looking good. They may do some adjustments, and then once they're happy, they may run the rest of those images through there, and so on. So there's a whole bunch of steps that go into this process, and throughout these, Globus is moving data, managing permissions, creating the shared endpoints so the right people have access to them, and so on. And then another example of where our integration services, our professional services come into play are where you have the need to access very many different services, each of which require different credentials and different levels of access. A common example is we have a lot of researchers using Jupyter notebooks, and we want to enable them to reach out from those notebooks and access those different services so they can really do large-scale research in a very sort of interactive way. And so we've integrated Globus with things like Jupyter Hub that allow you to just use your Globus credentials to access Globus endpoints at different places and so on. And then a number of our users have gone a step further and have wanted to present more of a seamless view to their users. So they've done that by adding a branded website, as we call it. So this is really sort of skinning our web app. And you can see here one example for FaceBase, right? So it's the same web app with their colors, their logo, and so on, and many of the other pages, the login pages, and so on are styled such that it looks just like any other campus system or organizational look and feel. The other thing you can do also, I didn't show you the login page, but this is our federated identity login page. So you can show up here and log in with over 500 different identities. But if you have an identity provider that's not listed, it's not part of the federations that we pull from, you can always add that to your subscription, and then your users will be able to use that, and this will enable a single sign-on with against your endpoints as well. So just to summarize then, so I'll leave lots of time for questions. right? We do streamline data collaboration. That's the file sharing. I showed you a couple of the connectors, the Amazon and the Google Drive connectors that give you this unified view across different storage systems. I showed you how you can access data directly through the browser using HTTPS capability. I showed you the high assurance endpoints that are suitable for managing protected data. And then we looked at a number of things that are more relevant to system administrators, like the management console and the usage reports, how you can optimize performance. And then the most recent examples I just walked through that actually use our REST APIs to integrate Globus features into your own applications. So with that, and before I wrap it up, I do want to say that the last reason that you might want to consider for subscribing is because it's the right thing to do. And I'm not one to lay guilt trips on people, but I always say to people, consider your usage and how much of that is supported by the goodwill of others, right? We do have a lot of free users, as you saw the chart earlier. Some of them use Globus extensively, and I think they just rely on others to sort of make sure that the service is around for them to use. They probably don't think about it very much or at all, but I would encourage you to think about that and see if there's some way that you can actually contribute to that overall. So I'll sign off with the call that the Research Empire needs you to subscribe, and with that, I'll take any questions. I don't know if there've been any on the chat so long while I've been talking here. But I'll switch over there and see if I can address some of those. Okay, looks like lots of chat going on. If you'd like to ask a question live, feel free to unmute your mic and just ask it directly, or you can just type it into the chat. Hi, is there a question? Actually, I hear someone typing.
Hi, this is Peter Ruthford from Indiana University.
Hi, Peter.
I had a question about, so we have a fairly distributed organization with a number of different central research storage systems, but then we also have distributed storage systems in labs or in other departments or regional campuses. Currently, our central systems are under a subscription, and we have others that want to be part of that subscription, but we don't have an easy way of delegating subscription access without giving them a set of shared credentials. Is there a better way to do that, or is there something in the pipeline that will assist us in that?
So one thing you can do when you do have sort of different groups within an institution that want to have essentially separate subscriptions, we can generate separate subscription IDs, and they can associate their resources, their storage systems, with those subscription IDs, and then they'll get separate sets of usage reports. They can have their own system administrators that have access to their management console and so on. So there's that level that we can enable right now. We're also working on sort of more of a self-service subscription features, but those are way down the line, so I'm not going to talk more in detail about those. But there are ways to do some of that. We do have large groups like the NIH has a lot of the institutes that subscribe as different subscriptions. So feel free to reach out to me directly after this, and we can talk in more detail about how you can make that happen.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Vaz, this is Jeff Raymond calling from the University of Pittsburgh. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Jeff.
Okay, yeah, quick question about the term. How long can one, what are the options for terms for the subscriptions? Is it a year, 3-year, 5-year type deal, or what? Talk about that a bit.
The standard term is 1 year. You can prepay multiple years, and there is a small discount you get for prepaying multiple years. We typically won't do more than 3-year fixed price subscriptions, but yeah, I'd be happy to chat with you if you have specific needs on that. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Any other live questions? Greg, Mary, are there any particularly interesting ones that you would like me to broadcast more broadly here? I see people ask. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going through the chat here and trying to answer fast and furious. There were a couple questions about kind of from the security standpoint of endpoints accessing a DTN. Can they pull IP information? Can they set the firewall? You might want to give an example of the folks that we know that are doing that in a dynamic way, setting the firewall rules dynamically based on access.
Yeah. So there are. So Globus doesn't have any sort of built-in facilities for doing any kind of network configuration on the fly. There is a library built into the grid FTP, the endpoints, where you can actually call out and hook into the flows that are initiated during a transfer, and you can call out and do your own network configuration. That's frankly, we don't talk about it very much at all because it does require that you write your code against some APIs, and but we do have some people that absolutely must have that. In general, we try and work around that and work with people to see if there's ways that they can set up static routes and things. Even if they're natted, we can still figure out how we can make their endpoints accessible for our control channel. But if you absolutely must have that, the best way to start that conversation is to file a support ticket, and then we can look at that and figure out what the best path forward is. And I noticed that there were some questions on Box. So yeah, I should mention that the way the subscription model works is there are different levels of subscription that give you access to different sets of features. The standard subscription gives you access to most of the things I talked about, with the exception of the high assurance bits. Those are a different level, and then we can sign a BAA on top of that as another level of protection for you. But then things like the connectors for accessing storage systems like Amazon and Google Drive and Box in the future and so on, those are an add-on to the subscription, as are the branded site and the alternate identity integration, if that's required. In most cases, for many of the institutions we deal with, you can get your identity to show up in that trusted list by exposing the certain research and scholarship attributes. I don't know if that was covered anywhere in the questions, but if you're looking for that level of integration, by all means, send us a support ticket and we'll help you work through that. Any other questions live or anything else, Greg, that you want to call out?
Vas, do you want to take a look at the chat and answer Nassim's question while I'm answering another one in the chat window?
Is there any way to... Okay, so you have two endpoints, a Science DMZ one and a regular one, or is there a way to automate the user to select the endpoint based on destination without trial and error method? Not quite sure what you mean by... So the user will select, the user does manually select the source and destination endpoints. I don't know if you're suggesting that you have servers on, sometimes you want to send it to the one on the Science DMZ, sometimes on the regular one. I'm not sure what the criteria are for doing that, but I mean, we don't have anything built into the service that will allow you to do that logic, but certainly you could script some of that if there was something that you could have the, based on some user attribute. So I guess I'm not completely understanding that question. So maybe if you want to, talk about that live, or you can reach out after the call, I'd be happy to dig deeper on that one.
I've got a question.
Hello, this is Nassim. You got it?
Yes, hi, Nassim. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I think you got the point. Actually, the users sometimes they don't are on the research and education network. So we ask them to use our high-speed Science DMZ, and most of the time it get failed because destination is not on the same R&D network. So then they have to use our different endpoints. So I was trying to find out, as you point out, maybe I have to come up some scripting, do the check before they before they select the endpoint.
Yeah, now I understand what you're doing. Yeah, so there are some endpoints that you're restricted. You can only get to them if you're on the RNA networks. Yes, like the ESNet endpoints. Yeah. Yeah, there is nothing automated in Globus. Yeah, you would have to do something out of band for that one. Yeah, gotcha.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. There was another question someone started.
Yes. Regarding the plugins, I see that Box is still listed as in planning or to come. Do you have any information on the timing for that? And are there any other connectors to like other cloud services like OneDrive that are in planning stages or being discussed?
Yeah, sure. So on Box, we expect to get that into testing sometime in late March. So I'm expecting, April, May timeframe. Ideally, we'd like to have something out by the time our user meeting rolls around, Globus World rolls around in early May. That's the current plan. But if you're not already on my list of 25 or so campuses waiting on that, please send me a note so that I'll be sure to notify you when we have an early access version out there so that you can try it out and give us your feedback. And regarding your second question about OneDrive and other similar cloud services, we haven't had many requests. In fact, I can probably count at most 2 requests for OneDrive. We've heard one person ask for Dropbox, but generally, other than Google Drive, because that's included a lot of the campus G Suite subscriptions, we haven't had demand for those. Again, if those are the kinds of systems that you want supported, let us know. Send us a note saying, hey, we would like to use this with OneDrive. We look at all those requests, and then based on where the demand is, that's where we typically try and prioritize our resources in our development. And yes, I see the note from Charles. Yes, so Indiana is on our Box connector list. So we do have that there.
So this is Peter from Indiana University again. I had one more question regarding endpoints with multiple servers.
Yes.
Is there some intelligence load balancing or so I think we've had a couple issues where we brought a server down for maintenance or a server came down and Globus still tries to access that endpoint. Is that a configuration issue on our end, or should we be pulling that out of the endpoint before we do maintenance?
No, it's not a configuration issue. That is so again, because we don't do any sort of heartbeat or check on availability of the system, we just assume if you've configured it that they're there. The transfer service will try and schedule a task on that on that DTN, and if it doesn't find it, will skip it after a while. It'll sort of move to the next one, but it'll keep going back to it. So yeah, if you really wanted to not get to sort of reduce that overhead, best to sort of take it out of the endpoint config and then add it back when it's up again.
Okay, thanks.
Greg, are there any others that I've missed here in the chat window?
No, I'm scrolling back. I think we pretty much covered everything. If I did miss something, please speak up.
Yeah, if Greg didn't get to you, please speak up or post your question again. Just hang here for another half minute or so. Is version 5 as feature rich as version 4? So this relates to Globus Connect Server. So right now, there are different, I wouldn't call them I wouldn't say one is richer than the other. There are different sets of features that are supported in version 5 and version 4. So there's a little bit of a delta, and we're working to essentially make sure that version 5 does everything that version 4 does, plus all the other things, specifically things like managing high assurance endpoints and so on. So right now there is if you're going to use version 5, it's really for specific use cases, like you want to support one of the connectors like Google Drive, or you need the high assurance features. But other than that, we suggest that people stick with version 4 if they're just standing up what I would call sort of regular, normal endpoints. At some point here, hopefully during the course of this year, we'll get to a stage where we have version 5 as the single sort of canonical version, if you will, that everybody can move to, but we're not there yet. Okay, don't see any other questions, so I think we'll wrap that up here. Oh, I see. Are there any file system specific support being built? Not sure. Oh, like Lustre. Good question. So, no plans for that right now. I mean, we obviously support Lustre and GPFS or Spectrum Scale, whatever it's called now. That we support them through their POSIX interfaces. We haven't seen a real need to sort of further optimize that. I'm sure we could probably get, maybe a little bit better performance or other things there. But if there's something specific that you're trying to do that's not supported through the native interfaces, we'd love to hear from you. And we can figure out if that makes sense. Okay, and a question about object stores. So we do support obviously a bunch of cloud and other, on-prem and public cloud object stores, right? So we do have, S3 and Ceph is supported, and so OpenStack, both Ceph and Swift, can be used, can be accessed. And Western Digital is also an object store. So if you have a specific one that wasn't listed on our connector page, please reach out to us and let us know what that is. In many cases, if it's an S3 compatible object store, and it truly is S3 compatible, let me just say that, there's a good chance that we can support that fairly easily with our existing connectors, so let us know. Okay, I think we'll wrap it up there. Again, if you have additional questions after this, you can email sales@Globus, or you can, myself, Vas at Globus, or our support team. All those channels we stay on top of, and we'll get back to you. Thanks very much, everyone. Take care.